Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Today I wanted to take a moment to talk about amendments and fertilizers. What are the differences? What do they have in common? So this is important to know because when you're adding stuff to your garden, you want to make sure you know what it's doing to your garden. The terms amendment and fertilizer are often used interchangeably, but there are important differences. So amendments are stuff that you add to your garden to improve the soil structure, drainage, or maybe the nutrient holding capability of your soil. Okay? Your amendments may or may not add nutrients, but that's not their primary purpose. Their primary purpose is to address the structure of your soil. So maybe they'll improve drainage, or maybe they'll make it so that your soil doesn't drain as much if you have a sandy soil, things like that. That's what you use amendments for. Um, all fertilizers supply nutrients. That's their entire purpose. Okay, so an amendment doesn't necessarily provide nutrients. Its primary purpose is to address the structure of your soil, whereas fertilizers always provide nutrients because that's their primary purpose. So amendments are structural and fertilizers are nutrients. So peat moss, for example, is strictly an amendment. It doesn't really add anything to the soil nutritionally, but what it does do is changes the texture, basically, of your soil. So it allows for better drainage and a few other things. But peat moss is an excellent amendment. A bag of, I don't know, granular fertilizer, for example, is strictly a fertilizer. It's not doing anything to change the structure of your soil, but it is adding a heck of a lot of nutrients to your soil. Some materials, like compost, can be both. They can be both a fertilizer and an amendment. So there are dual purpose things out there that can do both. But you can also do just one or the other, depending on what you add. So I want to start by talking about organic soil amendments. Soil amendments, to be clear, can be both organic and inorganic. Organic amendments are the decomposing remains of once living organisms. Finding organic amendments is typically as easy as collecting grass clippings or leaves from around your yard, or even just buying compost in bags. Organic amendments are easy to come by. There are several useful amendments that may or may not be available in your area, depending on what is typically used, but look for things like oyster or crab shells, buckwheat or rice hulls, these kind of things. Their availability varies by your region, but they can be very useful. Many of these materials are excellent additions to your soil, but some, like cotton gin waste or leather meal, can potentially add harmful things to your soil. They might contain residues of pesticides or heavy metals, so don't just grab anything to use as a soil amendment. I wouldn't use it unless it was designed to be used as a soil amendment. So compost is fine because compost was designed to be added to a garden later, but I wouldn't just use any old organic thing as an amendment. You don't really know what it has in it. I would stick to things that were designed for it or that you know exactly where they came from. Organic materials tend to improve their aeration and drainage in both clay and sandy soils and increase the nutrient retention in sandy soils because nutrients do tend to wash away if your soil is overly sandy. As these materials decompose, they also provide plant nutrients. You can add organic amendments liberally to almost any soil with some pretty good results. So, as an example, if you are digging out a 12-inch down bed and you want to use amendments, you can use up to 6 inches of organic amendments because they are organic, they do improve the quality of your soil, and they will have quite a lot of benefits. Use only well decomposed materials though, such as compost that is dark and crumbly and almost looks like dirt, or peat moss, which is already decomposed. Materials with that have not been allowed to decompose properly will continue to decompose in your flower bed, and sometimes that creates high concentrations of carbon and other nutrients that you don't want in your soil, because a lot of these amendments, if they're not properly broken down, are too hot, as we call it, for your garden. So make sure that you're not using something like fresh sawdust. You want it to be broken down because you don't want to damage the growth of your plants. You want your plants to grow properly. You want them to have the proper nutrients. So with organic amendments, it is important that they are properly broken down. Okay? Mulching an existing bed with a few inches of dried grass clippings or some chopped up leaves is a good way to incorporate organic materials and you know where it came from. So if you're not sure and you don't know what to add to your bed, grass clippings and some leaves from around your yard are excellent amendments. So we have talked about compost in the past. You can definitely make your own. If you can't get enough compost from your own yard because you don't produce enough stuff, maybe you don't have animals, maybe you don't produce enough food waste, maybe you just don't have enough stuff to create compost, you can buy it from a nursery, get it from a local farmer. A lot of towns and cities compost organic waste and sell it. Most of your farmers sell compost. A lot of them do anyway, because there's a lot of compost from farms that have a lot of animals. So you definitely can get compost that way. Leaf and yard waste compost are typically pretty safe. Be careful with municipal waste compost because they might not contain only what you want. There might be some plastics, and some of them have tested to be high in heavy metals. So you do want to watch when it comes to municipal compost and buying that. But generally, if you're buying it from a farmer or a nursery, you are pretty safe. So inorganic soil amendments. Okay. Inorganic materials are things like green sand, which gives you some potassium, and rock phosphate, which gives you phosphorus, obviously. And there might be lime and sulfur and gypsum. These are good things, but they don't provide nutrients. What they are doing is changing the structure of your soil. Okay, so there's a little bit of nutrients available in them, but that's not their point. Green sand and rock phosphate are becoming more widely available at nurseries. Most of them will sell lime, sulfur, gypsum that you can mix into your bed to kind of improve the drainage in your soil and stuff like that. So you can definitely look into that. You do have to be careful though, because with organic materials, it's hard to overdo it because they're organic. They are meant to be in your garden anyway. So it's not easy to add too much organic materials, but with the inorganic stuff, it is incredibly easy to overdo it. Okay, so you want with the inorganic material, you want to be careful that you do not over apply. You definitely want to check the directions on the bag or container of the stuff you bought to see exactly what it tells you about how much and whether you should dilute it or things like that. You definitely want to check. So when it comes to fertilizers, almost the same rules apply. Even though you're doing something different, you're adding nutrients. If it's an organic fertilizer like compost or baked down manure or something like that, then it's hard to overdo it because it kind of just goes into your garden bed and does its thing. If you're using inorganic fertilizers to provide mineral nutrients, it's going to be a little trickier. Again, you need to check the packaging directions. If you don't have the directions, look them up or get somebody who can help you figure out exactly how to use that material, because inorganic materials, either an amendment or a fertilizer, are good, but if you don't use them exactly the way they are designed to be used, then you are going to have a little bit of a problem. If you are uncertain about the fertility of your soil, a well-balanced fertilizer blend, either organic or inorganic, can really help your garden. So don't turn away from fertilizers, whether they're organic or inorganic. Just make sure you're following the directions on the packaging. Way too often people grab a bag of inorganic fertilizer and they just dump it on their garden bed. They didn't realize that maybe it had to be diluted, or maybe you're only supposed to add a certain amount per square foot of garden bed or whatever. But you need to check. Absolutely check. Okay, so a balanced fertilizer blend of rock powders and organic materials can be fantastic, but you need to make sure you're applying it as directed. You don't kind of want to get wishy-washy with it. You want to make sure that you're following the directions on your fertilizer or even your amendment packaging, because you don't want to wreck your garden bed and then have to let it just sit and recover for a year or two. You want to be able to plant in it. So make sure you're checking those package directions. Remember that too much fertilizer can damage plants, especially if it's an organic. Applying fertilizers is a little bit of an art form, so you may make a mistake here or there, but double check your packaging before you start, because then you will know exactly what you're doing. The packaging directions are not suggestions. They really, really are designed to help you. Okay? They're not made up. The manufacturer mixed that particular fertilizer or amendment specifically to be used in a certain way. So follow the manufacturer's directions. If you're not sure how to do that, the people at your local nursery do know. So don't be afraid to ask, because you really don't want to damage your plants or make your garden bed unusable for a year or two while it recovers from a little bit too much overenthusiasm. Anyway, that is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Remember to check your packaging before applying amendments and fertilizers. We'll see you tomorrow.